gentlemen, welcome to the first edition of Crouch, Pause, Engage from Turner College Rugby Club, Lakelands. I'm delighted to welcome our three panellists for this evening, Brian O'Mara, Gerry Murphy and Joe Schmidt. Thank you guys for joining in this evening, and our chat tonight is all things rugby. Brian, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I feel like an imposter with this Turner mob.
No, we'll be very soft on you this evening. Brian, you educated in Cork, 2 senior cups, were with Munster and then joined Leinster and won 99 caps. 9 caps for Ireland and also a number of times on the bench. And interesting, you're the 6th highest point scorer in Leinster history, which is something I didn't know. So congratulations on that. There's probably a few you left behind in the Perpignan game, though, I think, was there?
Thanks for reminding me, yeah.
Somebody just told me about that. I didn't really know about that one. Gerry Murphy, a legend. Started his coaching career in Wanderers, spent some time in Clontarf, went on to coach Ireland from 1992 to 1995, including the World Cup in South Africa. Has been involved, coached. Probably his greatest achievement is that he coached Turner College for 6 years after finishing with Ireland. And he just recently retired from his role within the Leinster branch of rugby, which he'll be sorely missed for his guidance on so many coaches and players over the years, lots of whom who would have featured on Leinster teams over the last decade. So welcome, Gerry.
Thank you very much. And
of course, Joe. The good thing with the Wikipedia is that it's quite easy to find information on people, and due to your success, your Wikipedia pages are endless, Joe. The only person I know who has more Wiki pages than you is probably Rala. So you've coached Ireland from 2013 to 2019, 3 Six Nations, a Grand Slam, 4 titles when you were with Leinster. So we're delighted to have you here. We miss you all in Ireland. And so how are things down in New Zealand?
Yeah, they're pretty good. Kelly and Luke are just off for a swim. It's 8 a.m. The sun is out, and we're hanging on to the last vestiges of summer, which should last for another month or so. So it's a nice time to be here, and it's a nice time to have the freedom that they enjoy here.
And Gerry, one of your first jobs when you coached Ireland, I'll be correct, was to interview Rala for the bagman job. Is that correct?
I have a number of claims to fame. One was that I selected Rala, and I think the other is high on the list of superlatives is that the claw. I also picked the claw for his first cap too. So it's a good combination.
Very good.
A hooker and a tight head.
And there's no truth in the rumour, Joe, that Rala interviewed you for the Irish job, is it?
He did frequently. And normally, sadly, normally he was driving somewhere. So as you know, he doesn't drive very quickly. So to get from Dunleary to Turner took 2 days. So he had plenty of time to do it.
And Brian, just one of such a slight apology, but I think you're probably happy with it, that on the social media poster that went out, there was a picture of Christian Warner instead of you. So I presume being mistaken for a bronze surfer isn't the worst thing that's ever happened to you in your life, is it?
Well, first of all, you put out a post saying 3 Irish rugby greats. I've barely played for Ireland, so I felt embarrassed and a bit of a fraud originally. And then when you put my picture up as Christian Warner, I don't think you realise that he was probably the most bronze Australian Adonis ever. So in any nightclub in Irish rugby, women flocked to him. I was like the ugly duckling in the corner, so you kind of ruined my week, to be honest.
Well, we thought there was a very good resemblance at the time when we put it up.
I think I've matured better with age, but I was a bit of an ugly duckling, to be fair. So no, but look here, I'm delighted to be here. I think Sean Skeen asked me originally. I have a good connection with him from St. Michael's, so I'm delighted to make any sort of contribution. So,
would Sean have been one of your pupils, or was it a bit after your time?
No, he wasn't. No, thank God, he was being a bit of a messer as well. His brother would be the director of rugby, who I know pretty well enough.
That's good. So, guys, do you watch the games over the weekend? How do you think they were? Gerry, what do you think of the French-English game?
I thought it was fantastic. I think, sadly, what think what came out of the weekend is that the Six Nations, it's somewhat split. There's the top two. I'm leaving the Welsh out of this. I'm not going to say anything about Wales, but England and France seem to be somewhere ahead of the rest of us, put it mildly now.
And Brian, what do you reckon on the France performance against England?
First of all, it's great seeing them back playing good rugby, but I think there's such a mindset that when France do something, it's like this cavalier attitude, or it's like off the cuff, heads up rugby. Some of the tries they've scored so far have been some of the best prescriptive coaching I've seen, and that enables them obviously to do their offloading play and their skills. But some of their coaching has been fantastic, which has been unlike France over the last 10-15 years. So a lot of their strike play against Ireland, their strike play against England yesterday was sublime, but it was really great coaching. And I think a lot of people ignored how well coached they are at the moment and just give it credit for their offloading game. But they've been a revelation, to be fair. And Dupont is, for me, as a scrum half, watching him play is just, well, what a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, there is. I think there's a misconception out there that heads up rugby doesn't involve a lot of coaching. It's probably the hardest thing to coach, I would think. Joe, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think with some of the personalities they've got, I think Fabien Galtier would have enough to work with. I totally agree with Brian around Dupont, but I think Jellyby is still a kid, but he's really starting to emerge as a fantastic player. He's got a long kicking game and a varied kicking game. He's a real threat to the line. He's quick, and his passing game is really good as well. He's a pretty brave defender. He had to cope with some pretty big men yesterday. And so across the board, Fiku's a handful. Brice Dulin in the 46th minute, if you were going to coach going up for the ball in the air, his technique is superb for a small man. He gets up over the top of bigger men, a bit like Hugo Keenan does as well. And I think Ireland winning the aerial battle today was crucial in the lead up. That aerial battle included the line out with Paul O'Connell obviously having a pretty good influence there. 6 steals in an international was fantastic. But so I think what Brian was talking about, if you have a look at Damien Penaud's try, the lead up to that, straight off the line out, the interplay, the running lines, the timing of the passes, I thought that was superb, so they have got some good prescriptive plays, but with the personnel they have, I think Fabien's got a bit to work with off the cuff.
It was probably the Six Nations in itself sort of came a bit alive this weekend. I thought the entertainment value in all the games was reasonable, and it's probably hasn't had the good press it has over the first few weekends, so it's great to see. In particular, I'm probably a little bit biased, some small backs making impacts at international level. There's still a place for them.
For sure.
One point on France, I think it's great that France have moved away from a goal-kicking scrum half. So as Joe said, their out halves, whether it's Ntamak or Jalabé, they're the main focus of the team. Whereas traditionally it's the scrum half who's doing all the goal kicking. It's so hard to balance a goal kicking scrum half with somebody who's bringing pace and energy to the game. I think it's very difficult to marry the two, and it's good to see that Dupont is just playing like a live wire scrum half, and the key player is their 10.
And I would have felt that, in fairness, England actually played a bit of ball yesterday, which was unusual for that since they're from their opening few games. Gerry, how did you rate their performance yesterday?
Yeah, they're just a very strong side. They always play like that. No great difference. They move the ball about a little bit. They only move it when they want to.
Would you not have felt a little bit more of a spark in their play yesterday than in previous weeks?
Yes. No, they played well. They won the match. They did everything they had to do. I wouldn't be a great fan of the way they play.
Yes, it certainly doesn't get you excited all the time, but in credit yesterday, they put some good patches together. And one thing I would have felt over I thought the standard refereeing this weekend was quite good, Joe.
Yeah, we obviously a couple of weeks ago had some big high impact decisions that were obviously one wasn't managed great, and the other one was a bad call. And obviously Ian Henderson, scored the try early on in Rome. So there were a few misses, but I think it's something that they'll be working away on. And Joël Juge runs a pretty tight ship, and he's got them working pretty hard. So hopefully we see good refereeing performances. But I think it's always easier for the referee when the players play pretty positively. And there were two great games. It's hard with Italy to get really excited in the game because Wales got away early on, and it was never going to really be a contest. But the other two contests were very, very tight, and there was really good entertainment value. I did think England kicked a bit less and played a bit more this week, and France did as well, because they kicked the ball a lot, but they played, and right from the first minute and 6 seconds when Dupont went over and scored from a great chip ahead from Teddy Thomas down that left-hand touch. So some great entertainment.
Yeah, it's probably fair to say that the players and the referees have improved over the opening two rounds of the Six Nations, and you have to give the referee, because it is a hard when they're first starting off in the international, the Six Nations. There is pressure on those as well. So I do think that your role in congratulations on your new role in the World Rugby, the High Performance Director. How's that shaping up or settling into it?
Yeah, it's not like coaching. I miss the coaching environment. Not so much match days, which are pressure cookers, but I miss the camaraderie and the really tight unit, the shared collective purpose that you have as a rugby squad. So I miss that, but it does allow me to spend more time with Luke, particularly in the middle of the day, because I tend to work at either end of the day. Sometimes meetings don't finish till 3 a.m. And I tend to do early mornings, but in the middle of the day I can spend a bit more time with Luke.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that there's always a role in Turnier College for you. Whenever you want to take the whistle out again, Joe, okay, we could certainly pitch you in.
Thanks, Moggy.
That's going out live now, Joe. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're in a position to actually offer job opportunities, Moggy.
That doesn't stop me doing it, though.
No doubt.
And Gerry, you have a little bit more time on your hands at the moment, so how are you fixed next Tuesday?
Moggy, I am very busy. I've no spare time at all, and Dublin 6W doesn't enter into my mind at all. South County Dublin, here I am. I'm not allowed to go to Turnier. Thanks.
Well, it's just outside your 5K.
Fortunately, it's just outside my 5Ks. Thanks be to God. Right.
And Brian, when you teaching in St. Michael's, you've obviously coached a number of the players that feature in the Ireland squads. When you at a young age, would you have noticed the talent in a number of them, or have they developed over the years, or how have you seen their development, I should say?
A good question, because I think there's about 17 players involved in Leinster from Michael's from the last decade. And people always ask me, I don't think we're doing anything special, or the coaches in Michael's aren't doing anything special. It's almost like it's just inbred daily. So if you see, how can I explain it best? You might see a Ryan Baird walking down the corridor, and if he was ever eating something bad, you'd have 20 lads in the corridor, what are you eating? This could affect the cup campaign. Or it's just, every match is very, very important. But what they're good at doing in Michael's is developing a really good habit of professional lifestyle, whereas maybe some other schools might prepare just for a cup campaign. So they're in the gym from second year, their diets improve, their video, maybe it's over the top, I'm not too sure. There's definitely a balance there. Okay, I've stepped away from coaching, but I think what they're really good at is preparing for life outside of schools rugby and professional rugby. So it's a tough one. I think they're very lucky as well, obviously, okay? You need a lot of natural talent to come through. But I think the players there feed off the player, and they have one really good system is there's no parent involved in coaching. I think that's unbelievably important. The majority of the coaches is past players. So you'd have 2 or 3 teachers ahead of each team, but it would be always past players from the previous 2 or 3 years were coming in. So it's kind of like a repetitive, a repeating cycle and it's always keeping you up to date on the best practices. So it's hard to define, really.
And would all the guys that have come through, would they have been earmarked from an early age if they had the possibility, or is there any, like, I know for Hugo Keenan, it was probably a late surge in his, I believe, when he was in Blackrock, which is great to see that you don't have to be banging away at the top level from the age of 12. Would Michaels have got guys later, developers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Great question, actually. I'd say it's 50-50. Like when you see James Ryan, when he was a second year, I was his assistant coach in Junior Cup, you know that he had the talent to go on. But then there was a lot of other players who, it's like, you just followed the success, right? And they'll see more players getting on. It's mostly about belief. Where you see players following, they're making it to Irish schools, they're making it to Leinster school or Leinster Academy. Geez, I can do this as well. I think a lot of them just follow in the footsteps of other people. Like Luke McGrath was one of the first to come through. What a great professional rugby player, right? So, no, it's 50-50. Some you can say, look, Brian Baird, a freak of an athlete. Like when the season's over in Leinster, he often went to the Irish athletics. He'd turn up with no training and he'd win the shot put by about 4 or 5 meters. So you have those type of brilliant athletes, but then you have other people like Cian Keller who couldn't catch a pass in school and slowly developed through skill and practice. So it's 50-50.
That's good. He certainly made an impact.
If that answers your question.
Yes, Ryan certainly made an impact today when he came on anyway, which was great to see. He seems he's a special player, Joe.
He didn't take the easy option.
Would you have seen much of Ryan, Joe, in your last year or so?
Ryan Beard?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I saw quite a bit of him. Obviously, I always took a real interest in the under-20s and would always have a couple of meetings with Noel McNamara during the season when he was 20s coach, and we'd have a couple of trainings with the under-20s, which always kind of got very edgy. I remember Andrew Porter having a bit of a dust up with Johnny at one stage. He wasn't taking a step backwards, and well, to be fair, he's built not to take a step backwards anyway, but Johnny doesn't either. So, a lot of those 20s, the likes of Hugo, Jordan, even a few years ago when I was coaching, those guys had come in and trained with us long before they were involved with the actual Irish squad. Will Connors, guys who were playing today, a whole bunch of them would come out and train with us. So you got to know them anyway. I got to know a lot of them through Tim, obviously. Tim played with a lot of them in the Leinster age groups from 16s through to 19s and the Leinster schoolboys. So kids like James Ryan, who came through, they were the same level as Tim. Even though he's a year younger, he was twice the size.
Yeah, it's great to see the development, and I think the work being put in all schools and all clubs with all players over the last number of years has shown fruition through to the provincial sides, even with the performances of Connacht with a lot of young guys. There's a lot of West Corkians now making it in Munster squads and stuff like that. So that things are going well at that end of things. Gerry, you were at World Cup in South Africa. Was that your last gig with the Irish team?
Oh yeah, that was the last one, 1995.
And you went back down with your first year with Terenure in 1996 on tour, and I think you were quoted as saying that the professionalism of the Terenure side was way above the professional of the Irish side at the time. Is that true?
Absolutely true. Absolutely.
Like it was
fantastic.
Yeah, I believe it was it the Blues restaurant or training ground where everything happened, was it?
No, that's completely wrong. We spent all day trained all the time, all day.
Yeah.
It was only Terenure could bring, I think we played 4 matches, but we brought 75 people on tour, which was quite entertaining.
And many of them were able to play.
Yeah, most of them played fairly heavily, but some of them on the pitch.
And you enjoyed your stint in Terenure, no doubt.
Moggy, my stint in Terenure, I was invited to help Des Thornton for 5 weeks in August. 5 weeks in August, or 4 weeks in August. And I stayed for 5 weeks. and then I stayed for 5 years. So there's somebody in turn here, their maths isn't fucking great, I can tell you that now.
They had something on you that you had to just hang around.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah.
And would you, obviously in your role in Leinster, you would have seen a lot of these young guys coming through the system. Would you have earmarked many of those in your day, or had a close eye on a number of those guys?
You know, Leinster, it's interesting listening to Brian there, that 10 years ago, Michael said one person in the squads. So it doesn't happen overnight, and they now have 10 or 11. The thing about the Leinster, the important part about Leinster is that it's about as many people as possible for as long as possible to be as good as possible. And if we go down this road of specialisation at 14 and 15 and 16, we're wasting our time. And sadly, the laws or the powers that be in this island don't understand that, and it's a complete and utter shambles and waste of time. And Joe was very keen, with fantastic help to everybody in Leinster. I'm not talking about professionals, I'm talking about the kids who played. And mentioning the under-20s, we're now in a situation where we don't actually have an under-20s competition, so we can work that out. And that's specifically to what's going on, and that's crazy. And we've got to keep as many people playing the game for as long as we possibly can. And Brian O'Driscoll wasn't a superstar in school ever. Gary Ringrose wasn't a superstar in school. There have been superstars, and obviously James Ryan was one of them. But there are loads of kids who just play, and we need to just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think that the ethos within clubs and within schools is to keep everyone playing, and I think we just have to make sure that we make that point, because I think particularly Irish sports people in any sport, even jockeys or whatever you want, the majority of them are dual sports kids. They play a number of sports when they're growing up, and getting a feel for Gaelic, getting a feel for golf and stuff like that.
The important thing, hugely important, that 99.9% of kids start playing rugby in Ireland in mini rugby and clubs and a bit in primary school, right? And the important thing in player development is that they play as many sports as they possibly can and enjoy themselves. And this taking kids out and putting them into special things is crap. It's rubbish. Unfortunately, Leinster don't do that, or try very hard not to do. And that's why there are so many good players in Leinster. Very straightforward.
And would the system down in New Zealand be quite similar to what's up this end of the country, Joe? This end of the world?
Yeah, it is, Moggy. I think kids are actually really encouraged to play dual sports, maybe three sports without making too much of a hassle on parents who have to deliver them everywhere. But and a lot of studies have been done around kids playing multi-sports and specialising late and being better at their chosen sport because they've played a number of different sports. They get a different appreciation for space or timing, or even the appreciation of what other people have to do to make sure that the team functions as cohesively as possible. So, kids tend to play tennis and do athletics and play cricket in the summer, and then rugby is obviously big, but so is basketball, and even rugby league in New Zealand has in some schools is very strong. So there is still competition for the athletes. I think you mentioned golf, a few of those individual sports, like even kids training for triathlon. There's a lot of paddling and rowing. The biggest sporting event in secondary schools in New Zealand is the Māori Cup, which is the big rowing regatta for national secondary school supremacy. So, it's not all about one sport. It is very much a multi-sport approach.
Yeah, and I think it's very important, and Gerry raised it, that's what we continue to do in this country. And I think the soul of rugby and the soul of a sport in Ireland is through the clubs, is through the schools, and having kids playing everything and enjoying themselves, because they're, taking guys, I do agree with it, and there is a competition between sports which sometimes isn't healthy. And I think if we let every kid play and find a sport, they will always come through at the top. And the likes of a Hugo Keenan and a Brian O'Driscoll, if we go down this picking guys out from a young age, they'll probably not make it in this country, and I'd be very sad to see. So it's up to us all to make sure that what's happening or what has happened is improved on, and that there isn't a structure put in place where kids are taken into academies from a very young age, because that type of thing is like a little bit like professional soccer, where they can pick loads of people. They only want one of them to make it, and you know, they ruin a lot of people's, not only their sporting careers, but their life in general. And I think it's very important that rugby doesn't do that with any kid, that promises them a hell of a lot from a young age, and then other kids are turned away from the sport because they're not within these elite academies from a young age. So I think it's something we should be keeping an eye on. And I do believe within Leinster and with all provinces that, you know, what we're doing works. We need to make it better, and we need to make it more fun, because there's one thing that we all need now this time is a bit of fun, and watching kids get back out in pitches will be great to see, hopefully over the next couple of weeks. So moving on. Yes, go on, Joe. Sorry.
It's one of the luxuries here. I was at a tournament with 18 rugby teams, senior men's rugby teams in the Maris Spillane Cup tournament this weekend. And those guys, there was a sprinkling of NPC players, but a lot of those guys, it was very competitive, but a lot of those guys only want to play socially. And I think we've really got to make sure that we encourage all clubs to have enough teams that everyone can get a game and enjoy a game at their level. They have age and weight grades in Auckland because there's such a big population and some very big men. So having that balance as well, trying to make sure that we cater for everyone, not just the elite player.
And moving on to the English game at the weekend, and in particular your experiences with playing England. I believe, Brian, your first cap was against England, coming off the bench against England in a fairly close one, was it?
I think Irish rugby, I think it was 1997 I got my first cap. It was slightly different from Irish rugby as we know it today. It was, well, it was wild. I think we were 24-6 down, and I was brought on for the last 15 minutes with the attitude, try to speed up the game. And looking back in reflection, the team were shattered. Like we weren't fit enough back then. We didn't have strength and depth. So I ran on for like a crazy 5 minutes through maybe 10 or 15 good passes. And then we ended up losing 45-6. So it wasn't the most auspicious introduction. And probably the worst part about it, back in those days, this is my main recollection of my first cap, to be honest. It's kind of embarrassing almost. You'd get your cap at the end of the speeches. So the tradition was there was 10 players per table, 5 English, 5 Irish, and each one would have to buy you a drink before the speeches. So by the time the speeches came around, and my name was called up, would Brian O'Meara like to come up and collect his cap and get the famous photograph? I was in bed getting sick. So I didn't even get to collect my first cap. I think I got it in a plastic bag maybe 6 months later.
I think that's when
Christian... wasn't the greatest first day of my life.
I think that's where Christian Warner stepped in and got the cap for you, I think, Brian. And that's where we got the picture from, I think, you see?
I think I delighted my parents. But even then, the following week, I started against Scotland. And back then, there was 5 Irish selectors, and they went to watch myself and somebody called Steve McGovern play against. I was playing for Cork On. He played against. He was playing for Garryowen. We played probably one of the worst matches you've ever seen in a mud bath in Garryowen, and somehow 5 selectors picked me. I'd barely played an AL match up to this stage. I'd no experience. I'd no provincial success. So I was like, geez, they really didn't have a duty of care to bring players in like they do now, with a bit more cohesion, a bit more planning, a bit more structure. I was thrown in at the deep end. I was 19, 20, I had no experience, especially trying to win games when you're under pressure. How do you slow down games? How do you deal with injuries, successes? So it was, I got picked when I didn't deserve to get picked. And when I deserved to get picked, I never got picked. So that was kind of my professional career in terms of Irish success.
When in Leinster itself, though, when you were playing there, you had some very good success, and you had a very good career in Leinster, which you enjoyed. Did your paths cross with Gerry? Gerry
coached me, I think, briefly. One year when he was in with Declan Kidney, he may have been in. Is that right, Gerry?
Yeah, the extraordinary train of events, because I had never coached a professional team in my life, nor had any particularly desire to coach a professional team. And Declan rang me, and I would have been an old friend of, well, still am a friend of Declan's. And we were sitting in my back garden, and knowing, if you know Declan, it takes some time to get around to the point he's trying to make. So we were sitting in the back garden, and it was a nice sunny morning, thanks be to God, having a cup of coffee. And I eventually said to him, Declan, what exactly do you want? What are you doing here? And he said, I want you to help me coach the Leinster team. It was somewhat taken aback, I'd have to tell you. But yes, and it was fantastic that from a coaching point of view, and somebody coming in like myself, completely from the outside, I had nothing to do with Leinster since the game went professional. And the players, including yourself, Brian, were fantastic and absolutely. And we did actually quite well, and we topped our group in the Heineken. And unfortunately, we played the 12th team, which were bloody Leicester, and they beat us in Lansdowne Road. And that particular weekend, Declan decided he was going back to Munster, which wasn't the most sort of auspicious time to say you were going back to Munster. And there was absolute mayhem for a few weeks. But it was an interesting experience, I'd have to say.
And going back to your days coaching Ireland, you had two very great successes against the old enemy in 93 and 94. That be correct?
Yeah, we did. I would say, as a team, we had a very good side actually. But eventually, we probably underperformed to a certain extent. We played well against England twice. Yeah. We hadn't been playing. When I took over, we hadn't won a match for, I think, 10 games or something like that. And then we lost the first one. We played like awful rubbish. And then we gradually improved, and we beat Wales. And then the last game was against England in Lansdowne Road. And my abiding memory of the game was we played very, very well. But it was, and both Brian and Joe would understand this. This is in the amateur days when the first thing you did against England was cause havoc in any way that you possibly could. And we had a team which were very highly selective in how they could cause havoc, and managed to cause havoc and play very well and put the havoc into a good, into a good space. So my abiding memory of the game was we won it very comfortably. We won it 17-0 or 73 or something. Mick Galway scored a try at the Lansdowne end, on the left-hand side, just in front of the old Lansdowne tea room. And there's a great video sequence of it was a good try. It was an offload. He galloped over, surrounded by a few people, and the place went bananas. And there's a great shot of the crowd storming onto the pitch, and leading the charge is a young lady. Absolutely beat everybody by a couple of yards to Golov, and gave him a big hug and a big kiss, and it was his sister. And this is absolutely framed in the legend that the only person that laid a hand on Golov in the match was actually his sister. So that's what happened.
It was there used to be, whenever you went to those internationals, there was always probably a more entertaining game on after the game when all the kids are out on the pitch playing against each other.
Oh, absolutely. And we were what happened Joel would be interested in this, that we lost the first game. We were off, and we all had to sit down afterwards, and Willie Anderson and myself were the two coaches, and we got everybody to come back on a Saturday night, fly into Dublin and trained on a Sunday morning, because they were all playing like Simon Gagan's in England, all over the place, guys in the north, and the guys themselves decided that they were going to get better, and without that, the best coaches have the best team, best players, no doubt about that. So that's what happened, and it was just hard work on just the guys, and very sad in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, the great Gary Halpin died, and Gary was one of the guys who was playing. Right. So it's interesting. It's interesting, but it's completely different. It was, we used to meet on a Thursday night before the international.
And the following year in Twickenham, that was a fantastic win.
The good story about that particular match, there was a guy, Maurice Field from Malone, was playing in the centre, and the morning of the game, we were staying in a very flash hotel in Chelsea somewhere, and Maurice went round the corner to the bookies and asked the bookies what price would they give him on Ireland beating England. So they more or less said to him to name his own odds, because there was absolutely no chance. We hadn't won in Twickenham for 20 years or something. So he was just about to put a bit of money on, and he said, "What would you give me a double on the other game?" He said, because France were playing Wales, and would you give me a double on Ireland and Wales winning? And France had a very good side that stage. And the guy said, "Yeah, just pick your odds." So your man picked the odds. So both Ireland and Wales won. So everybody made a few bob. So it was my first interest in professional rugby. We all made a few bob.
That was the great Simon Gagan's try, I think, was in that game, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
13-12.
Yes, he played. Simon was an extraordinary guy. I mean, Simon, when just go back to how kids develop, the IRFU ran a course in Clongowes during the summer, and they used to bring in an under-19 group of players as well as the coaches. There's a lot of coaches there, and this particular year, and this kid appeared over, and his father himself, they're originally from Claremorris, I think, over in the west, and his dad and himself appeared over in the boat from London. He was only 18, I think, and then he got a bus down to Clane, and then they got a lift up from Clane to Clongowes because his dad wanted to play for Ireland. And this blonde kid appeared and ran rings around everybody, obviously, and then he went off and played for the Exiles, obviously. So that's an example of what's great about the game.
And the reception from the English coaches after you beat them, was it warm?
Oh yeah, it was just exactly in the amateur days, certainly. As Brian would said, there was certainly in Twickenham there was a huge dinner afterwards back in London, maybe about 500 people. Because the rugby union would invite all the people, the volunteers and all sorts of presidents and things like that, and the players were in the middle of this. I think just exactly that. There were five from Ireland and 5 from England at each table, and the normal things went on. The props only talked to the props, and the wings only talked to the wings, and but the coaches were all absolutely perfectly fine with everything.
I think Jeff Cook was coaching England at the time, was he?
Jeff Cook was one, and then, I can't even remember, the Harlequins guy, I can't think of his name. Yeah, but there's nothing that a glass of red wine wouldn't,
And apart from the first experience against England, how many other games were you involved with England, Brian?
Let's start. Yeah, I think I stopped another time in 1999 over in Twickenham. So my involvement for Ireland in terms of Six Nations is pretty limited. Most of my memories would be Heineken Cup matches. I think what I would have had, because when you're not involved in a team regularly, you almost had an imposter syndrome. So I'll give you a brief description of how I kind of felt imposter syndrome. Back in the day when we were training, we used to do oldies versus youngies at the start of a training session. So it'd be over 28s against under 28s in a game of tip. And the oldies always won it. So it'd be like Mick Galway, Peter Classy, all those lads. They'd be a self-appointed referee. And I can remember one stage, this is like in 2000, Brian O'Driscoll and Ron O'Gara, Dennis Hickey scored this magical try. Keith Wood, Mick Galway put their hands up, forward pass and brought it back. And as Ron O'Gara and Brian O'Driscoll were running back to get in position, I can remember them distinctively saying, when we're oldies, we'll get our revenge. They were 21 years of age at that stage. So like, they were thinking that they were guaranteed to be here 7 years later. In my mind, I was like, I'll be lucky to be here for lunch. So when you're not regularly picked, you kind of, very hard to have a decent day. So I think that was, a lot of players came and went, and kind of, I went back to Leinster and I had a pretty decent career from like 2000 to 2003 and a half. But never really with Ireland did I feel like I belonged or I had a decent say. I was always on the margins, which is very interesting. I'd love to write a book about it, but yeah, that's my experience. Not an awful lot of success, to be honest, at international level.
A lot of players have never got to that level, so congratulations.
Well, I think I have more regrets than anything else. I think I deserved to be picked when I was playing well, and then I got picked when I was, not good enough or not enough experience to deal with the situation. I was probably a bit immature as well when I was younger, so I think there's an awful lot of luck getting selected, whether you're in the right form, you're with the right players, you're with the right management. So there's a lot of luck involved in doing well at the international level as well.
And in the professional era, Joe, does the meals and all that still happen after the Twickenham game?
Yeah, they do. There's some quite good traditions that are continued from the amateur area. And it's interesting, Brian, saying that you definitely need a bit of luck. You do need a bit of luck to get selected and to have a good side. But I think there's less luck involved now because there is a stronger filter, and players are watched more closely, and players are kind of in the system longer before they get picked usually. Although there's still the odd one. Obviously, James Ryan played for Ireland before he played for Leinster. So there's the odd one that has come through, but he didn't suddenly appear on our screen or on our radar. He'd been on our radar for 3 or 4 years before he actually played. So I enjoy catching up with coaches. It's a pretty lonely job being a head coach sometimes, and there's a little bit of I suppose comfort in chatting to other head coaches, because you're always under pressure. If you win, you could have won by more, or you should win next week because you won this week. If you lose, well, you should have won this week, and what are you doing about it? And so it is a continual and so it's nice to be able to let off a little bit of steam. Not that you do it very often, but that little glass of red wine that Gerry mentioned, that still happens, and it's good to catch up with the other coaches.
And of your memories of beating England, which of one of the three stand out, or do they all stand out in the 6 matches?
They stand out for different reasons, really. We played them 6 times and we went 3 each, so it was, we got better than 50% with most teams, but England are pretty tough to get more than that with. They had a pretty good run. It was quite nice to beat them. They'd had their T-shirts printed for back-to-back Grand Slams when we beat them in the Aviva. Kieran Marmion started at 9. Connor had been ruled out on the Thursday. We had a team that they didn't think would be capable, and we got a super win that day. Ian Henderson scored a try. Obviously, the really big one amidst the beast from the east, -5 degrees in Twickenham, but we warmed it up to be 21-5 up at half time, and I was terrified at half time. Can we still lose from here? But we defended for 8 minutes solid at the start of the second half, and scored the first 3 points in the second half to go 24-5 up. And after that, we were too far away for them to get back into the game. So it was pretty special because that capped off the Grand Slam as well. So there was, it's fun. One of the funny things about England is I remember we lost there 13-10 in my first year coaching. and we'd won the Grand Slam. And I remember being interviewed by someone, maybe at the Sports Awards or something, and they said, "Oh, what a fantastic Six Nations. Just that one bad performance against England." And I actually thought we'd played our best game against England. We went 3-0 down. We went 10-3 up. Rob Kearney scored a set-piece try that was an absolute gem. And they got a breakout try and managed to squeeze a 13-10 result. But I felt we'd played really well that day. So it's funny. It's, as a coach, you're looking for performances that build results, whereas I think sometimes people who are looking to commentate the game look at the result and then create a narrative on the back of the result.
Yeah, and it's probably more relevant now than it's ever been, that the result is the one that's analysed more, and particularly when a team loses, it's always something you seem to analyse defeat more than you do victory. Did you ever get your hands on any of the England Grand Slam T-shirts, Joe?
I'm not interested. I'm not interested in any England kit, to be honest, Moggy. All I can say
on eBay or something. We'll have a look and see if I can pick them up for you.
No, but the worst thing for them was that the ad was released. I don't know if you remember coming up on YouTube, but they had these Nike had done this big. I think it was Nike had done this big kind of advertisement, and then they couldn't use it really because they didn't win the Grand Slam, because we beat them in the last game of the championship. But the thing I would say that Gerry was mentioning earlier is that England are fantastic hosts. They look after you really well. They are very even-handed. They don't try to, there's some places you go where they will try, to kind of make you uncomfortable or create a circumstance that is unsettling for you. Whereas England, they are very much positive hosts, which we always really appreciated.
Yeah, I've always had a soft spot for it, particularly their cricket team as well, which went down to India there during the week, which was good to see. But I always find playing English sides, and afterwards they're always very hospitable, and it's probably the game you always want to win, and it's probably one you don't like to lose, but overall it's a great experience. I think, Gerry, I just remember hearing that when you tripped to Italy, one of your first games in charge went a bit haywire before trying to get to the ground and stuff like that. Was that when Italy did something to us?
It was a celebrated trip for all the wrong reasons, that we were delayed in Heathrow for 6 hours or something ridiculous. Then we weren't able to train because the pitch, there were potholes all over the pitch, you couldn't train. And then the coach to bring the team to the ground, the coaches didn't appear. And there was a great bit of entertainment where the manager of the team at that particular time was the great Noel Murphy. And Noel was out on the main road outside the hotel trying to flag down taxis to get the team to the ground. So it was a complete and utter shambles from start to finish. And it was one of these, it was a sort of somebody had the bright idea, we'll play an extra game. And we met in Heathrow. People flew into Heathrow from Cork and Dublin and England and everywhere, and then stood around Heathrow for 6 hours, and then went over on the Friday and didn't play, funnily enough. So it was a shambles. But it was one of you just. And they actually had at that stage they had a very reasonable team. They've gone down fairly heavily since then. I don't know what. It's very difficult to know how they can really, because they don't have Joe mentioned earlier on. I don't think it's worth saying again. There's a very great similarity between kids playing rugby in New Zealand, or youth rugby in New Zealand, and rugby in Ireland, bearing in mind that rugby is the key game. And there's a simple example in Ireland. The rugby in New Zealand is like hurling in Kilkenny. where that's the fantastic ability to coach kids and play the game and play other games as well. And we are dependent on our schools and our clubs. And I just don't, the worry for Italy is that they don't have this tradition. They have club rugby, but it's not, it couldn't support, it can't support really an international team. And they're really struggling in the professional game at the moment. And I'm not sure, it's a two-edged sword here. The World Rugby has to try and spread the game and improve the game in a worldwide sense. But it's very difficult to know how, if you drop it down from the 8th, 9th, 10th into that area there, how to support, because it's about competition, it's about the background to the game and the people playing the game. You know, now Japan have suddenly changed, or there's always been huge rugby in Japan, and you could see them becoming, you know, hugely getting better and better and better. But it's very difficult to see Italy how they're going to do it. I don't know how they're going to do it, because there isn't that background. You know, you can go to, if you take last Friday, I mean, literally Leinster's fourth team put 40 points on them. So that is a worry. But we had a very good weekend that weekend in Italy when we finally got there. Moggy, you know.
You enjoyed it,
and it was very, and like Joe says, as the coach, the fact that, you know, I hadn't booked the tickets or ordered the buses or whatever, I am to blame for all this, I can tell you. And everybody is ducking and diving, and whereas if you win, you're surrounded by committee men. At this stage, there wasn't a blazer in sight, and it certainly was. It's a good learning experience.
And how do you within World Rugby, Joe? Obviously, your role would be to develop the developing nations as well and stuff like that. And there seems to be a couple of bright sparks. The likes of Georgia have improved anyway with the help of Tedo, the Terranir 10, and Italy. What is it right? Would you feel that if there was a promotion relegation into the Six Nations, that would help teams develop, or do you think having Italy in a tournament where unfortunately they have some very talented and I think their two halfbacks are super players, but is it going to help develop the game if they keep struggling to, you know, keep in touch with teams by half time?
Yeah, it's a tough one, Moggy. I think they've got a really good coach in Joe Schmidt. I think Franco is a really good thinker of the game. He speaks Italian, even though he's South African. And so I think he's really astute. And I'd hope that, you know, you mentioned they're 9 and 10. They're kids, really. You know, they're fresh out of the under-20s. And so their development over the next couple of seasons, I think if people can just be a little bit patient with them. They've got some good loose forwards like Pelledri, obviously, Negre. Mbamba came on and did a really good job. He almost got away down the right-hand touch there to score, and he's quite explosive. But they lack the sort of depth and quality of player that the other nations in the Six Nations have. So it's going to be a battle for them. And Georgia, you know, they have their own. They have their own battles, just trying to keep their organisation afloat and organised. They've just had an election for their governance, and so they're just starting to get themselves organised again. But that may take a while, because what people don't see is that there's a lot that goes on behind teams now, particularly in the professional era, and it's not just about having the players available. You know, I think it's something like 24% of all professional rugby players now are Polynesian, and yet the 3 Polynesian countries that are at the height of world rugby, Fiji, Samoa and Tonga, most of their players play overseas because there's no professional competition for them. So, you know, there's lots of complications for all sorts of countries, and even more so than ever after COVID, you know, decimating club competitions. There's no amateur rugby in most countries in the world. I think, you know, apart from New Zealand and Australia, I don't think there's any amateur rugby being played around the world. I know that the MLR in the US is about to get underway, so we'll see how they go. I think they've had a strong vaccination program, but there's still a lot of COVID-19 in the US, so it's a really complicated time.
And with the new deal for the Six Nations, will that bring it further away from the other countries, or will it? How is there any of that money will be used to sort of promote rugby or televised rugby in other smaller nations, or will the gap will just get bigger, will it?
Well, I'm not sure, Moggy. The Six Nations operate independently to World Rugby, albeit they have to follow the same rules that everyone agrees to, and World Rugby just really facilitate that as a governing body. Just like most governing bodies, the actual competitions are owned by the nations who run them. So Six Nations own that. CVC have a 1%, a 1/7 share of that now, by the sound of things. But I mean, it is timely for those nations because they're all feeling the pinch, because revenues have plummeted, because there's no gate sales, sponsorship is less, broadcast money is less. So, for the professional game, it's complicated. But as I said, the amateur game is what we need to resuscitate and get started as soon as we possibly can. Once we can get some freedom from the pandemic.
Yeah, well, they're obviously in Ireland, within Leinster particularly, there will be a huge swell of opinion to try and get back on the pitch. And it's Gerry was just talking earlier before you came on that there's a big play to get the Leinster School Senior Cup played, and we're allowed to play, and the Junior Cup, I think, Gerry, as well, is it?
Oh, it's not so much. It would be great to get because of the traditions in the cup, and it's such a big competition. But it's to get the kids out playing, full stop. And the schools committee, I know, are very keen to try and organise something after the Leaving Cert, maybe in either June or maybe August, as Brian was saying earlier on. And I think that I would agree totally with Joe that people in governing bodies tend to say that the professional game pays for everything. But that's actually quite disingenuous, because the professional game pays for the professional game. It doesn't pay for anything else. So we must try and encourage what is the traditions of the game, because we wouldn't have a professional game without the schools and the clubs. Full stop. And if the IRFU or the New Zealand Rugby Union stop giving money to the clubs, a little bit they do give, the clubs would still carry on themselves. I mean, it's totally ingenuous to say, it's this money runs rugby. It runs professional rugby, and that's the danger I think in the Northern Hemisphere now, is with the new, and Gordon Darcy was writing actually very well about it during the week, that if we're getting to a stage now where if you want to watch a rugby match, you're going to have 5 different Sky, Premier, Hoochie Coochie, or whatever they're calling the bloody thing. So that there's not everybody in the world can afford 200 quid a week just to watch rugby. So I don't know how much thought. I mean, people say, "Oh, well, that's never going to happen." Well, it's already happened. So yes, it's.
Sorry, Moggy, I have to jump off. I've got a 9 a.m. meeting. So, Gerry, great to see you. I'll catch you for a coffee later in the year.
Yes,
when I'm finally allowed to get back up. Yeah. Moggy, good to see you. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
I think you totally underrate your career. Humble as you are, well done on what you did achieve and what you're doing at Michael's. So I will see you guys later. And
just a quick before you go, Joe, predictions on next week, Ireland or England?
Sorry, I've got to go, Moggy. Yeah, an Ireland win at the Aviva. I think they're gathering momentum. Great kick from Johnny to win. After Scotland, you know, they're no mugs. They did really well. They've already beaten England, so why don't we join the party and try to do the same thing in good fashion? So I'll certainly be watching. I'll see you guys later.
Thanks, Joe.
Yes.
Jerry,
finish off there.
Yep. Yeah.
On club rugby, the biggest thing I see with club rugby is the lack of media exposure. So the best days of my career, 100%, were playing for Cork in the AIL. Amazing trips. But you always got exposure, whether it was in the media, radio stations, there was some games live. And if you're a young player coming out of schools, you're in the media, there's supplements, you're just all over the place, social media. And then you go to play your club under 20s and nobody watches you. You're getting no media exposure, there's no match reports. So people love some sort of extrinsic motivation or even just publicity. And it really angers me when I see even RTE come in and they parachute in for the AIL final. Like, watching one game doesn't make you buy into a club's game. Come to more games, promote more games on radio. And I think, as you're saying, the lack of respect by the media particularly is really hurting the club game. And I think if they need to expose it a bit more, I think it would really help.
Yeah, and I actually think, Brian, it's probably something that we may discuss on a later show of Crouch, Pause, Engage. And Brian, your prediction for the weekend?
Yeah, I think with Joe, momentum's massive in sport, and that last kick, it's going to be a great week's training for Ireland. Obviously, England had a good week win as well, but I think Ireland's in a very tight game.
And Gerry?
You'd like to think that we can win. I'd say it'll be very difficult.
So that's a no.
No, it's very difficult. Did you study English in intern Euro college?
I wasn't in for that class. I was at the den.
No, you missed that class, did you? No, yeah. No, I mean, I'd say it'll be very difficult.
Yeah.
I just think that a lot will. There are a couple of very good pointers where our pack will be just as good as theirs. Our lineout is better than theirs. Our scrum will be fine. It's what we do with the ball when we get it. If we just continually go through the phases, we're wasting our time against them. We have to think a little bit more like France play against them, where you're going to kick properly, you're going to kick well. Because if we just go through phrase after phrase after phrase, we won't beat them. We have to do something out of the ordinary.
Yeah. Okay, listen, we're going to wrap up. Sorry, Brian.
I think England are still struggling because the Saracens issue is still not settled. Like, English rugby has torn itself apart with the Saracens. Like, it was almost like club eat club. The whole lot of them ganged up. And Saracens have been everything to English rugby: coaching, style of play, just innovation in the game, the amount of coaches that have went on. And I think just the fact that they've been devoured by every other club, there's still something rotten in the state of English rugby, I think. So I fancy Ireland.
Great. Listen, guys, we're going to wrap it up there, and thank you for the first edition of Crouch, Pause, Engage, and we'll definitely have you back.
I'm glad you got it right that time, Moggy.
Yeah, they won't have to edit this bit, I hope. Thanks a lot, guys.